Established by the Shehu Shagari government in 1979, the Ajaokuta Steel Company, among other things, was created to fast-track industrial development of Nigeria. The steel plant, located in Ajaokuta in Kogi State, north-central Nigeria, sits on the 24,000 hectares of land with about 43 units. However, what was meant to be a major driver of economic growth for the country remains comatose 40 years after its conception due to various challenges. In line with the renewed hope agenda of the current administration, which seeks to diversify the economy, President Bola Tinubu has harped on the need to revitalize the steel company. And with the establishment of the Ministry of Steel Development in 2023, efforts are in top gear more than ever before to bring Ajaokuta Steel back to life. Well, joining us now for more insights on the future of Ajaokuta Steel Company is the Honorable Minister of Steel Development, Shaibu Abubakar Audu. Thank you so much for joining us on the program Journalist Hangout. So first off now, the 21st of August, it will be exactly, good to have you, it will be exactly 1 year of the inauguration of President Tinubu's cabinet. So how will you describe the journey so far as one of the ministers?
Thank you very much, Esther and team. It's been a tough journey, but it's been a journey full of opportunities and a lot of renewed hope for Nigerians. You know, like you mentioned, the Ajaokuta Steel plant, which you mentioned, which is a core component of my ministry, was established in 1979, about 45 years ago. But for the first time in 4.5 decades, there's been a, sole focus on reviving the steel industry through the creation of the Ministry of Steel Development. It has given it renewed impetus. It has given it renewed hope. We've put significant measures in place, which I will talk about over the course of this interview to tell Nigerians what exactly President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, GCFR, is doing under the renewed hope agenda through my Ministry of Steel Development to turn around the steel industry and allow it to reach its full potential.
So let's talk about your life now as an investment banker. How did that prepare you for this job as a Minister of Steel Development?
Thank you very much. I worked in a leading investment bank for over 20 years. It was the biggest bank in Africa, part of the biggest bank in Africa by assets and profitability, as well as the leading investment bank in Nigeria. My work as the Minister of Steel Development involves a lot of financial engineering. Having a financial background helps you to navigate a lot of, a lot of the process and things that you have to do across various ministries. So to be able to get the steel industry back on track, to be able to revive Ajaokuta and all the core components, you need a lot of financing. You need to be able to have the exposure and the experience of talking to investors, understanding their mindset, both local and foreign investors. And you need to be able to put a deal on the table that is in the best interest of Nigeria, where at the end of the day, that deal will create millions of job opportunities for Nigerians. It would bring significant amount of foreign direct investments into Nigeria, and it would help to grow the GDP of Nigeria and continue to allow us to be not just a leading economy in Africa, but one of the leading economies in the world. So I have tapped into my financial experience, investment banking, wealth management, corporate and investment banking experience, over the last 20 years to enable me to navigate this new assignment fairly well. But not just the financial part. In terms of leadership, is all about managing people. You know, I managed hundreds of people. The institution I worked in had thousands of staff. I was one of the you know, top leaders in the organization, and I had experience in managing people, understanding their pulse, and to be able to get people to deliver on assignments for you on your behalf. So those experiences has been quite useful.
Right, point taken there. So, but Nigeria, we understand, has a lot of potential in steel sector. But as the minister in charge now, how do you think the country can maximize steel development?
Thank you very much. I agree the steel industry has huge potential. In my view, based on my analysis and based on the numbers I've seen, the steel industry, I would say, would be worth in excess of $100 billion if you look at the combined you know, steel plants, both public and private, that we have in Nigeria, as well as the value chain, you know, across board. The $100 billion industry, or in excess of that. Now, part of what we're doing to turn around the steel industry is to, like I mentioned earlier, focus on, you know, turning around some of the key things in the government-owned steel plants. Let's take Ajaokuta, the primary steel plant in Nigeria, Ajaokuta. You know, we've done about, you know, 4 or 5 things, which, you know, we've done over the last year to turn around that industry quite aggressively. We have engaged with various partners, both local and foreign partners, to try to secure the required financing to be able to revive Ajaokuta. Part of what we've done, we've looked at the blueprint of the steel plant. We're talking to the original equipment manufacturers, the original builders of Ajaokuta, to gauge their interest in coming back to help us to raise the required financing to be able to revive Ajaokuta. And that the conversations is at very advanced levels. You know, we're talking to the Russians. I'll be paying a visit to Moscow in the next few weeks to further that conversation. But we're not just talking to just the original equipment manufacturers. We're also talking to even the, you know, Americans, you know, the UNIDO guys, the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, which is, you know, a U.S. institution, has done a rapid assessment of Ajaokuta, and their reports have been quite interesting. We're engaging them to see the opportunities there. Basically, Ajaokuta, the solution has to be a phased approach, where some of the low-hanging fruit, some of the plants and production units that can be revived, you know, such as the light section mill, such as, you know, the wire rod mill, the lime calcination plant. Ajaokuta is so vast that, you know, it can even be used to produce, you know, even cement, you know, outside of steel, you know, and you know, things like the thermal power plant. So there are various phased approach that can be used to revive some of these entities and some of these production units. We're having very you know, serious, advanced discussions. You know, now this is where the rubber meets the road. And, you know, we want to establish and determine who exactly can help Nigeria and Nigerians to get this plant running. You know, we've looked at our history. There's been a lot of, you know, bad history about Ajaokuta. You know, some of the things, you know, I guess would also be mentioned in the course of the interview. But, you know, Mr. President is not deterred. He means business. He means to turn around Ajaokuta. I'm confident we would turn around Ajaokuta. So, you know, the other people that we're talking to, the Chinese have also shown interest. Even the Ukrainians have shown interest. And you know, there's also local production capacity and local steel producers that have also shown interest. So we have seen massive interest in Ajaokuta. But like I mentioned, we would look at all the options, and based on the seriousness, the ability, because now it's not just about talking and making promises. You have to be able to deliver for Nigeria and Nigerians. You know, once we're able to establish that and make a determination, you know, I would then present the options to Mr. President, where Mr. President will make a final decision as to the way forward. But like I mentioned, Mr. President is very determined to turn around Ajaokuta, and I'm very confident that we would achieve that, and we would make significant progress before the end of the first term of this administration. The second thing that we're doing with respect to Ajaokuta is today I was at the Shehu Shagari Center with the Minister of Defense for State. Today is the 60th anniversary of Defense Industry Corporation of Nigeria, DICON, and you know, we're very serious about a partnership between the Ministry of Steel Development, which Ajaokuta falls under, and the Ministry of Defense, where DICON falls under, to form a partnership to build a military-industrial complex within the Ajaokuta region. Like you mentioned at the start of your program, so it sits on 24,000 hectares. Only 800 hectares is being used by the steel plant. So there's over 23,000 hectares of available land, which is almost the size of Abuja. So a lot can be done. All the resources there can help us to move Nigeria to the next level. There's an engineering workshop that we're working on revamping. Once that plant is revamped, helmets, you know, can be produced there. Rifles, bullets, you know, components for tanks, you know, military equipment and hardwares can be produced there. Then the last thing that I'll mention, which is also very critical, is I've also had a discussion with Mr. President that based on the vast land and availability of space in Ajaokuta, that, you know, it's important to set up an industrial complex, which Mr. President wants us to implement. So I've asked my team in the ministry, including, you know, the Executive Secretary of the National Steel Council, the MD of Ajaokuta, some of my technical advisors, to put together a blueprint for an industrial park very, very quickly that would encompass two very important components. One is a free trade zone. Some of that portion of the industrial park will be dedicated to a free trade zone. There would also be a section that would also house a CNG park as well. Mr. President has shown his desire to basically move away from, you know, PMS to CNG because of the cost savings, up to 60% savings, like the President made at his last speech, would be benefited by moving to CNG. And Mr. President wants 1 million CNG vehicles on the road by 2027, in the next 3 years. So we have a lot of plans for Ajaokuta, and we're very confident that Mr. President will revive Ajaokuta within the shortest possible time, and Nigerians would smile again.
Okay. In the year 2020, the federal government announced that it was going to revive the project, and that by the year 2023, it will have put the project to bed. Why has it been difficult for successive governments to revive the Ajaokuta Steel Company after all the money that we spent to build such a gigantic steel complex? And the second, following from that, my other question is, the Russians are quite good at building something like this. In fact, originally they helped the Indians, who are today very big in steel production, to set up their steel plants. Are you looking at going back to the people who built the project originally, or looking in the direction of other countries for help?
Thank you very much. You know, part of the challenge that Ajaokuta has had over, I would say, the last, 45 years, 4.5 decades, has been the lack of political will. If you see the issue that we had in 2023, where almost $500 million was paid out as a settlement to GINL, the Indian company, is a very unfortunate situation for Nigeria. You know, that amount of money could have gone a very, very long way in reviving the entire steel plant. You know, so these are some of the, unfortunate history that we see in this country, However, the president has a different mindset. Sometimes, you can decide to dwell on the past and not move forward. Mr. President has come to say that he has drawn a line. This is a renewed hope agenda where things must be done properly in the interest of Nigerians. And he has put in place measures to ensure that things significantly improve. So what I would say is the key reason why we haven't made significant progress in Ajaokuta is, the lack of political will and so much inefficiency and corruption in the system, in the past. But things have turned around and are looking very, very different. In terms of who we are talking to, whether we're going to go ahead with the Russians, what I would say is, Mr. President would ultimately look at what delivers the best value for Nigeria and would make the ultimate call. But, the people that we're talking to, which I already mentioned earlier, are very serious-minded people. They have put various proposals on the table, but we're just not looking at the proposals. We want to ask the questions. Where the financiers coming from? Do they have the capacity? Do they have the share capital? Do they have the required equity? How quickly can they move from, stage 1 to stage 2? How long do we need to revive some of the low-hanging fruits in the first phase of the revival process? Whether we want to revive 3, 4, 5 plants, how long is that going to take? Nigerians are impatient, the president is impatient, and we have to be able to deliver value in a way that, Nigerians, would look back and be satisfied with the leadership and their leaders. So those are the things that we're looking at. But like I mentioned, UNIDO has done a rapid assessment under the US guys, and we'll look at who is most serious, who has the best capacity, and how best we can make it work. We know what we want. We know the capacity of Ajaokuta, and we're confident that we can deliver steel and make Ajaokuta work and turn around the steel industry.
I want to ask you, how many times have you visited the plant since you became minister, and how did you feel seeing overgrown weeds all over the place and disused heavy equipment? How exactly did you feel?
Yes, I've visited the plant since I've been minister, but not just while I was minister that I started to visit the plant. Ajaokuta is actually on the way to my village. You know, you can't get to my village without going through Ajaokuta. So Ajaokuta is, you know, is in my community pretty much. You know, a few kilometers away from my village in Ogbonicha in Kogi State. You know, you have to go through, you know, Ajaokuta. So I see Ajaokuta all the time. I'm very familiar with its environs. I did a thorough tour of Ajaokuta. You know, I went into, you know, some of the workshops. I went into some of the, you know, lime calcination plants. I saw the blast furnace. I've seen the vast array of land in Ajaokuta, and I'm convinced there's huge potential. And I think that although it's been a very, very difficult assignment over the last 45 years to turn it around, but like I mentioned, I'm very, very confident that the president this time around would change the story by the grace of God.
Okay, Honorable Minister, I was even going to just say that maybe the word we should use for you should not even be visit, since it's your state. And one unique thing about it is that the president, this current administration, has actually unbundled what we have seen before, where you combine the steel and mining together. So people will expect a lot, especially from you, focusing on this particular sector. But can you help us? Because a lot has been said. I think I was born around that time when this was built, and a lot of things have been said, and people seem to have described it as a white elephant project. So, and some of the things they said is been plagued by delays, corruption, and lack of funding or sabotage. Even that may not be the right word you've used. But what would you say is the biggest challenge facing this steel complex? How do we really come out? Because if the report I read is right, we understand maybe just about 1/4 is in use. What happens to the 3/4, and when do we really come out of this quagmire that we found ourselves?
I think the Ajaokuta issue is a complex problem. You know, a lot of steel is being produced, you know, across you know, Europe, across Africa. You know, we're importing, you know, about $4 billion worth of steel into Nigeria. So getting, you know, looking at all those parameters and getting Ajaokuta to be revived is not such an easy task. It's a task that has to be managed delicately because of all the geopolitical issues. But, you know, I know that we can reach a good landing, you know. I would say that the biggest challenge with Ajaokuta that we're seeing now is funding. The place requires a lot of funds. Part of my next trip would be to examine, you know, the capacity of the partners to be able to provide the required funding. And, you know, the funding would be, you know, based on milestones and things like that. So hopefully we should be able to get things off the ground very significantly. But like I mentioned, you know, part of what we need to do is raise the funding, get the technical expertise, and also get the local engineers to help us. You know, there are a lot of local engineers within Ajaokuta Steel Complex that are very competent people. You know, I've interacted with some of them. Some of them are highly intelligent, highly experienced, and, you know, they can help us get off the ground. And as usual, you know, let me give an example. It's like, you know, you go for the Paris Olympics. You know, it's your first time in Paris, and you get there, you know, and you start driving all over the place by yourself. You know, you need a tour guide to help you and direct you and take you to your destination. So, you know, the engineers in there, within the Ajaokuta, you know, steel complex, you know, are some of the, you know, tour guides that would help the, you know, expertise that is brought in to be able to get us to the ultimate destination.
Okay, Honorable Minister, there were also reports that the word is idle Ajaokuta workers got about 38.9 billion naira salaries in 10 years. What's actually the true situation regarding this matter?
Yeah, yes, I saw the report. It was an allegation laid by you know, a senator from Kogi Central. We also saw the response from the you know, unions in Ajaokuta, and what I would say is that the system is not perfect. There are a lot of gaps in the system that requires to be fixed, like, you know, all government bureaucracies. But, you know, about 10 years ago, we had about 3,200 staff in Ajaokuta. Right now, 10 years later, the staff strength has reduced by about 50% to about 1,600, right? Now, you know, government, you know, workers, sometimes is not so easy to lay them off or to create redundancies. But what I would say, or what I would clarify, is that a lot of the staff, you know, a lot of the staff are actually doing some work in Ajaokuta. And I'll give you an example. Ajaokuta is built on a river bank of River Niger and River Benue. A lot of water goes underground into the underground pipes of Ajaokuta. If you don't have engineers that are draining that water constantly, the plant would sink. So it's important to have engineers that, you know, are there to look after some of those challenges. If you look at the mechanical equipments in there, you know, some of them, you know, you need to run them periodically to ensure that, you know, it's like once you park a car, if you don't start it completely, you know, the battery will run down, the car will run, you know, will run down entirely. But, you know, you need to start the car, you know, every other day or every day to make sure that, you know, the car is still functional. If you look at some of the electrical equipments, even the, you know, hospital facilities, a lot of accidents that happen, you know, around the Ajaokuta environs, you know, from Lokoja, from the Kogi axis, they are rushed into the hospitals, you know, in Ajaokuta, and they've helped to save many lives. So I think it's too simplistic to say, you know, Ajaokuta, you know, they are not doing anything. But I agree that, you know, it's something that needs to be looked into. There are ways to improve the system, and the system, you know, must be improved. And, you know, one thing that is important to clarify, the 38.9 or let's say 40 billion that was paid to staff is not being paid to Ajaokuta Steel Complex. It's being handled by, you know, the head of service and the IPPS system, you know, that handles payments to staff. So nobody has taken that 40 billion and handed it to the, the management team of Ajaokuta to manage on behalf of anybody. So I just wanted to lay that. Yes.
All right, let me quickly ask this question before we let you go. Now let's talk about other steel companies like the Alaja and Oshogbo. How are those companies faring? Give us a little bit of that.
And then recently there are protests across the country. What's your take on those protests?
Okay. Thank you. Those are two very important questions. Just quickly, you know, as part of my tour of all the agencies, and all the government-owned steel plants. I visited some of the steel rolling mills in Jos. I know the situation of the steel rolling mill in Alaja, in Katsina. When I went to Jos steel rolling mill, it was a very sad state. It was shut down. It's under lock and keys. It's not working. It's not functional. The same thing with Alaja, is under lock and keys. Katsina is somewhat working, but is nowhere near full capacity. Alaja is also, not functional. So I think what I've done is I've asked my team to write to the BPE to make a request for the, share sale agreements of the privatization that was done under the Obasanjo administration, for us to review that. Part of the options that we're looking at is, some investors have bought the plant and have shut it down, and it's not serving the interests of Nigerians. Jobs have been lost, no FDI is coming in, no value is being added. So if, as a government ministry, we can engage potential investors that, can bring in funding, and, the owners, under the share purchase agreement, can review and see if they are willing to partner or sell some equity stake to potential investors that can bring in some funding to turn around, those steel rolling mills. So like I mentioned, is a difficult task, but we're thinking outside the box and working very hard to resolve those situations. Now, the protest is a very important question. Nigerians have complained of hunger, and rightly so. And some of those complaints are legitimate, but as you mentioned, there's been some miscreants and some unruly elements that have tried to hijack that protest for a regime change, which is very unfortunate and which hasn't worked. Thank God. But some of the decisions and all the decisions Mr. President has made has been tough decisions, but that are absolutely essential and required for Nigeria to function. Let me give you an example. When Mr. President came and he removed the fuel subsidy as well as liberalized the FX regime, as a country, we're paying $10 billion annually on subsidies, which is 16 trillion naira. So we're paying about 1.5 trillion naira every month as subsidy payment. The country could not afford it. The country was on the verge of bankruptcy. Mr. President mentioned that 97% of the revenue that was generated by the government was used to service debt. So debt to revenue ratio was 97%. Within 1 year, these reforms that Mr. President has put in place has reduced that dramatically by 30% to 68%. The government revenue has increased to about 9.1 trillion naira, which is, over 50% of what it was last year. The states have been giving, on an aggregated basis, over 570 billion. So Mr. President is putting measures in place. He has given authorization for the imports of 500,000 metric tons of both wheat and grain to reduce the pressure on the cost of some of these essential commodities. And we're seeing some of these measures, we're seeing positive effect. So the price of tomatoes have crashed. Right. And I think on the protest as well, it's important, to give credit to, people they use from my home state who jettisoned the idea of a protest because of engagements that have been ongoing between the youths and senior members and leadership of, the All Progressive Congress. The governor did a great job in trying to mitigate the protest. I also engaged, the youths across board. I brought in, part of the federal government initiative which impacted more than 5,000 Kogites in terms of the nano businesses that paid, $50,000 across board, distributed rights and things like that. So we're on the right path. Thank you.
Absolutely. I can't agree any more or less. Thank you so much for your insights. Honorable Minister of Steel Development, Shuaibu Abubakar Audu, for sharing your insights on efforts of the current administration to revive Ajaokuta Steel Company, among other topical matters. We appreciate your insights.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.